Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Jay Ziegler. I am the Director of Policy and External Affairs here at the Nature Conservancy in California. I'm delighted today to welcome Governor Jerry Brown for a post-election discussion on what this election may mean for the environment, for climate change, for biodiversity, for striking a better balance in sustainability. I know that these are challenging times for everyone. We are confronting the COVID challenges around us. The economy is shaky, and we have a president-elect, but we have an election that hasn't been acknowledged by the current occupant in the White House. So these are certainly interesting times. I do want to welcome Governor Jerry Brown. We've had the opportunity to work with his administration actively, especially across water issues. It's certainly a guest that really needs no introduction as we kind of continue our series here on the determining decade. And why is it the determining decade? Because we're running out of time, candidly, to address the challenges of protecting biodiversity, achieving a balance in climate change, and protecting the natural world around us. And Governor Brown is certainly active on those fronts. We are doing some continuing work with his institute at UC Berkeley today. Governor Brown, you're the longest serving governor of California. You've mayor of Oakland, attorney general, secretary of state, and twice a presidential candidate even. So it's great to have this opportunity to speak with you in the election. Can you help us make sense of this election and what it means, especially in relation to environmental objectives and sustainability?
Well, it certainly means more polarization, more close elections, more close votes in Congress, no clear consensus, no decisive move forward that takes Republican and Democratic votes together. So it means all that. What it means a little longer down the road, hard to say. If the Republicans block everything Biden does, that might set up a very favorable environment context for the congressional election in 2 years. And it might be that Biden could sweep out a lot of the Republicans, and in the last 2 years get a very decisive agenda. So I would bet McConnell was thinking whether he should give Biden just enough so McConnell can't be called the blocker in chief or what, but one never knows what the Republican imperative dynamics are. So I'd say there's lots of different things. You could probably find 50 stories in the mass media that will respond to this question. I think none of them very definitive, and I don't know that that's even a very important topic to explore, because it has a range of possibilities that are pretty clear, but which one, that is less clear.
So as you note, there really, as you look at the electoral map across the country, we can see really the sharp red-blue divisions that, the election was decided effectively in a few states. And just as you think about this polarization across the country, is there any salve for this? Is there any way we kind of break this, what really feels like a debilitating negative trend in lack of bipartisan cooperation. And
not necessarily. We do have examples where you can't break a deadlock. We had the Civil War in our own country. Germany had the 30 Years' War when the Lutherans and the Catholics fought for decades, wiped out a third of their population. We had the example of Weimar and the stalemates that happened because you had the left, the Bolsheviks, communists, socialists. They were divided. At the Catholic center, you had the Protestants, you had the big industry, you had the shopkeepers. So when you get enough elements that are equipoised to block, you get drift. So I'd say more drift for a while. And then the only real question is, does we get the temptation? Well, first of all, the foreign powers take advantage of that and make moves into what we consider our interests. And then do we respond, and do we get into a war? And is that facilitated by the drift, which could be overcome with the national spirit of conflict and external fighting? So that I'd say is a very severe danger. Drift in itself is bad, but it's not as bad as war. So we have war as the worst and maybe least likely. Then we have drift, which is very likely. And then the next question is, drift doesn't go on forever. They take 2 years, 4 years, take another election. Maybe new issues will come to the fore. I think the main point we've got to look at here is that Bernie Sanders got 35% of the Democratic vote, advocating a number of things. We have the various progressive members of the party, but they're not a majority. They're under a majority. And they're under a majority of 40%, more or less, of the Democratic Party. So we're in a moderate country. Now, moderation does not suit the energized progressive, the woke, nor does it satisfy the Tea Party, the evangelical, zealous partisans, the strong Trumpian base that will wear their MAGA hats and go to a rally even if their own life is threatened. So we have a lot of fervor. Sometimes historically, the term enthusiasm is a negative, not a positive. So there's a lot of enthusiasms, and how that all unfolds, I'm not prepared to. I don't know if you want to spend the rest of the time probing that, but it's speculative. It could be interesting because there are a number of factors to be considered. But I'd say as a kind of a top line summary, that's the most I will say about what the next few years will look like.
Governor, thanks. Your audience here today is the Nature Conservancy board, our volunteer leadership in California, our staff and our membership out there. We're just got a good question that, does our agenda, and you're well familiar with the Nature Conservancy, a bipartisan national global environmental organization. Is there any opportunity for climate change, the climate agenda, and environmental issues to kind of cross the party line here again? It didn't used to be a partisan issue, but
yeah, I think there's a lot of chance. First of all, I think you should be inviting over European conservatives. In England, you've got that Tory party running things, Boris Johnson, and they've just announced the banning, I think by 2030, of fossil fuel vehicles, or some subset of that. So there's a real move in Britain as well as in Germany and other countries of conservatives working to reduce carbon emissions. So there's nothing inherent about Republicans being against climate and being deniers. That's fed by I think by the oil industry, the coal, gas industry, and then that power, whether it's the Koch brothers or whomever, that feeds a lot of the Republicans. And then somehow the evangelicals get in and give it a theological overlay. And then you get some feeling of solidarity. And climate change is caught up in this larger identity group called the populist moment under Trump. But I don't think I think they can find other things to rally behind. The big problem with climate change, it's going to take serious government intervention. If you want to ban cars, only the government, the coercive arm of government can do that. Well, the libertarians, they don't like that. And the evangelicals, even though they want to control women's bodies, don't want to control carbon emissions if it's the government doing it. In fact, they don't even want to have a market mechanism called cap and trade or some kind of price on carbon. So there are some ideological resistances, but I do believe there are examples of conservative people who are by no means either Biden or Bernie Sanders Democrats in their thinking, still could be conservationists. Conservation has many roots in the conservative mentality, conservative values. I think a lot of this in England was conservative. So I think preservation of land, taking E.O. Wilson's idea of preserving half the earth, that's not even on the agenda yet. Carbon emissions people are now focused on. To say you got to leave half the earth alone to the non-human rest of us, the rest of species, that's not even on the agenda yet. But I have to say, there's a sign here. China is having this summit on biodiversity. So I think we're way beyond where we were just a few years ago. I can remember having a press conference at NASA Ames down there by Palo Alto and releasing a statement by 1,000 scientists on a strategy and a path forward to deal with climate change, and no paper would print it. I think maybe, I'm almost sure, virtually none. And they only wanted to print whatever the news of the day was, whatever little item, scandal, problem in the administration, or he said what, or whatever little thing they put on the shiny objects they put in the paper to get eyeballs. They totally ignored climate. Now fast forward, and you even had it in the debate where Biden says you have to phase out oil. Then he backed off a little bit afterwards, but even the fact that it's a topic, because basically climate is a non-starter. Even the environment is not political. Political is race. Political is, if you're a populist, exports, foreign trade, Wall Street. If you're a conservative, it's abortion, it's transgender, it's homeless. So the juice of politics is not to be found in the climate environmental community for the most part, if you're outside of California and Vermont and Washington and places like that. But having said that, it's more in the forefront than ever before. So that's hopeful. And with Biden in, it's going to be even more in the forefront. And but you go with Biden, and where are we going to be in 2 years? Will the Republican demolition squad do good work, do what we'd call it bad work, they call it good work, undermining Obama, making Kamala the next Hillary Clinton, lock her up kind of thing. I think you have to be prepared for the worst, but at least there's a battle. And with a battle, there's a tension. And with the tension, people can come to recognize climate, biodiversity are fundamental and really far more profoundly important than all the other things they're talking about.
Well, that's an encouraging marker for us, I think. And it's in following up with legislators, even the governor, I think, would like to have this climate resilience bond on the ballot. I think there's enough support emerging that we have to be investing in solutions to address climate change. You pointed out the Great Britain's action on mobile source emission vehicles. Governor Newsom just announced an executive order on that front. How are you feeling about maybe some of the vanguard states, like California, Oregon, Washington, Vermont, British Columbia, in designing solutions that the country can follow? What should the next steps be for California now?
Well, just the scoping plan. The scoping plan has to lay out the path forward, but it's going to get harder. Getting to 2020, 5 years ago, we said this is really hard. The utilities said it couldn't be done. It couldn't be done on renewable portfolio at the level that we wanted, and we couldn't have storage. Well, we do. We've made significant progress. A long way to go, quite a long way to go. But I think that's good. And then we've got the Public Utilities Commission. They can push our utilities. We have the State Energy Commission with their regulatory power. So there's a lot California can do. But the real ball game is Biden, White House, his executive orders, working with China. China right now serves as the #1 enemy for Washington politicians. This is the cause of the virus, the cause of our unemployment, the cause of the working class disaffection, all sorts of things. And we now have to say, oh, wait a minute, we have to be planetary realists. China is facing climate disruption, and so are we. China is polluting big time. If America goes to zero, the world still has a big problem. So China and the US have to lock arms in very extensive partnership, working together. Biden can bring that about. That, and we can support that. So far more important than the subnational, which is good, but the big ball game is China and US. President Xi and President Biden. What can they do? They're the two most important men on planet Earth as we speak, as far as climate change is concerned.
I know you put your own capital in this effort in the California China Climate Institute. Can you give us a sense of what that work is designed to foster and achieve?
Well, #1, just breaking through the barrier of growing enmity towards China. And I don't want to in any way whitewash or excuse, or because I'm not an expert on all the things that China is doing or not doing. But I do know from my experience as governor of California that we have to take steps every day to reduce carbon emissions and to make our natural lands sequester carbon and to stop destroying the habitat. Well, China is key to that, and we got to work with China. The Institute works with Tsinghua University. We're researching carbon pricing methods, cap and trade ways that China is working on differently among their different provinces. So we're working with, at the subnational level, we're working on natural lands research on what the lands can do. And that's, I think, difficult. I'm not ready to talk too much about that. And we're also working on zero emission vehicles. The big driver is not California. If China would just say, next year, whatever we said we were going to do, we're increasing it 10%. And the year after that, another 10. Pretty soon we're at 50% requirement for selling vehicles in the biggest car market in the world. Now, if that happens, and if we see it happening, then California can set a similar rule. Biden to the EPA can give us the waiver, and the 13 other states that follow us can follow us. So they'll have 1/3 of America. We'll have all of China and probably some places in Europe, maybe most of Europe. Well, the auto market will get religion, or they will die. They will go the way of the dodo bird. The combustion car is as bad as the horse carriages dropping their manure in London at the turn of the 19th, 20th century there. What did they do? They went to cars. They went from horse shit to carbon emissions. Okay, now we got to go from carbon emissions to zero emission vehicles with a lot of land use change. So we're walking more than we're driving, and a lot of public transit so we can collectively move around instead of getting in our little metal and plastic bubble to get from point A to point B.
Well, we appreciate you raising the import of the land use picture here and what's happening as we think about not just technological solutions of moving to lower emission vehicles and lower emission lifestyles, and but addressing landscape scale issues to conserve both nature and address our carbon dioxide crisis. I'm just as turning back to California here for just a minute. what are your takeaways just from the state election in the state? We saw marginal gains, I guess, for Democrats in the legislature. We lost a couple of seats, a couple of seats switched from Democrat to Republican in the House. State voted an almost 2/3 margin for President-elect Biden, and yet we also saw a number of progressive ballot measures, from affirmative action to cash bail, civil justice reform, property taxes, defeated by voters. I guess
Right.
there's such a mashup there. I'm wondering if you could help us make sense in thinking about California voters.
Well, don't think just because you put a progressive label on it, the California electorate's going to vote for it. That's the first thing. We need to be more discerning in what is at stake and what people want, what they don't want. I do want to just say, relative to our last discussion, that in terms of lands, I myself am sitting here at the ranch where my grandmother grew up, right where I am, and we have 2,500 acres here, and we are engaged in restoration, in understanding. We do have cows, and the cows belch methane and they chew up the grass and all that. But beside that, we are really trying to find ways, and I'm inviting the Native Plant Society and others to see this as an experimental opportunity to really create healthy soil and what habitats would work. And I myself am noticing not just the election returns, but just on my own soil here, since I've been here for a couple of years, I see this green indigenous plant called lipa growing all over the place. It wasn't there last year. So I'm noticing the mystery of nature doing its own thing. And so I want to get to these abstractions called politics, but I want you to know that I'm grounded here at what used to be called Veneto, in a very, in land, and we're on the land, and I'm very becoming more educated, more sensitive to what's in front of me, kind of in the spirit of Gary Snyder and Wendell Berry. But I will now go and talk about these abstract propositions, some of which have been defeated and aren't coming back. So talk about beating a dead horse. The ones that lost, they're not going to come back for a while. That's just the way it is. But there's so many things going. Some of the reason they lost, people just didn't want it. They looked, they saw, they came, they saw, and they voted no. That's true. So if you have some thought to the contrary, you better rethink, because I don't think the people are that bad. And that's the way they saw it. I mean, we live in a different world. I wrote, one of my neighbors came by a few weeks before the election, and he wanted to bring me some rice. We're in Colusa County, big rice. And he drops off and said, I said, well, how do you feel with all this virus around? He said, don't worry, it'll be over on election day. So there's different perceptions. And you may think that the obvious is to vote yes, but there are a lot of people who say no, vote no. So I would just say not too many. The tax thing, Prop 13, obviously it's a fear. People are hanging on to their land, their house. They're going to be very sensitive to anything that might threaten it. And I think the other side spent 75 million, so that helped. The Uber thing, they spent 200 million, and people probably like the convenience, and so they couldn't quite figure out the labor rights enough to vote for it. Affirmative action, I actually lost more this time, less support for affirmative action this time than there was before. I think there's a lot of diversity in the state, so a lot of different ways of looking at things. And I think I think that's a harder one to fathom, but I think it's very, very important to look at that, because there's a lot of terminology being thrown around about the society and its embedded values and how we're going to uproot them and change them. I would just say that there's a great division in our country, maybe to put it in its most extreme form, between the evangelical perspective and between the woke perspective, between Ocasio, AOC, and McConnell or McCarthy. So that's what America is. It's more moderate than the liberals want. It's less conservative than the conservatives want. this is where we are. And like good organisms, we either adapt to our environment or we go extinct. So I personally am more on the side of adaptation.
Well, I think we'd like to roll our sleeves up with you and kind of share some of the work that we're doing in the Upper Sacramento and the Point Concepcion Preserve, and even in the Delta now on restorative agricultural strategies. So,
well, this was a big year for acorns. My blue oaks really dropped more acorns than I've ever seen before in all the years I've started coming here. So the big question is how to plant these damn things. We got lots of acorns, and so we have a lot of territory. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice to have blue oaks all along the front of my property there, protected from the cows by the fence. Anyway, so I'm interested in some of these nitty gritty issues, as well as the big, how come Prop whatever got 52% or whatever the hell it got. Not that those aren't important. I like politics. I enjoy it very much. And I had my own proposition, Prop 20, which we got over 62% no, which is my position that I wanted. So I'm very happy about that. But I don't think it's worth talking about to the League of Conservation. I mean, to the Nature Conservancy. I think you guys have a unique niche, and it gets not enough attention. Not enough people know what the hell you people are worried about and know about, and they need to. Particularly if we got to save half. I mean, they say we're saving 30% in California. To get people to leave land alone, I mean, that's going to be a lot bigger than the propositions that you just saw on the ballot.
Well, we're pretty excited. One, your biodiversity executive order, I think, got this rolling. Governor Newsom has followed that with an executive order to achieve 30% conservation of habitats and species by 2030. We feel like this is a pretty good start. We're energized by it. We're really taking it seriously as our next big opportunity to help shape an agenda that connects with the public, that connects with voters. What's your counsel for us on next steps there?
Well, I think
how do we make it relevant?
Well, that's a good question. You got to educate people. People have to know about the land. People live on cement. They don't dwell. They are garaged, and they go out to restaurants where the food and the animal meat is brought into them in a totally different presentation from what it is in nature. So I think we have to re-educate people to the fact that they are mammals living in this web of life, and start appreciating the land, the beauty, the parks. People like to camp, people like to hunt, they like to fish, the oceans, all these things. The more visual, the more real you can make the natural environment here, as opposed to the Zoom calls, the artificial, stuff that we're in artificial. We're probably going to evolve to a non-organic species anyway. That's what some people say. The only way we're going to get to Mars is to become non-organic and become just some kind of computerized metallic chip that becomes the new home for consciousness. That's that's transhumanism, which I think is completely crazy. But people, it's a little bit. I throw that out just to kind of trying to show you the disparity between what you're doing, what we believe needs to be done to preserve our natural environment, and then what are some of the new forces of technology that are rocketing forward at every turn.
Well, I love your enthusiasm for this, because I think it is the core of our mission here, and I think one of the, as we think about ways to connect with people, clearly fire is on people's mind. I think we've burned 4.6 million acres across California now. You got us started on an ecological based fire forest management regime in second half of your administration. Where do you see the ability to link, I think, public consciousness to some of these big climate risks with protection of the natural environment?
Yeah, that's a good. Fire is the most obvious. Um, so I think that's a good one. I think sea level rise takes longer. I think they were going to get more flooding and more extreme weather events. So that's going to alert people to our water facilities and storage, and also the damage that can occur to people from flooding. So, uh, how we relate. One of the things I just have to say, which is not a pleasant note, but given the fact that we're pumping, 7 billion human beings and mostly the industrial powers, pumping all this greenhouse gas, heat trapping gases up in the atmosphere, and they're going to stay there for a couple hundred years. And we're pumping 40 billion a year. So great, we get down to 37, 35, 30, 20, 25, 15, but it's all more. It's more CO2, more methane, more chlorofluorocarbon, more black soot, all into the environment. So things are going to get worse and worse and worse. And that's going to cost you a lot more money. Now, as you're spending all that more money to adapt, you got to spend more money to mitigate, to reduce carbon emissions, to absorb the carbon that's there as best you can. That's going to cost money. So you have to work harder and harder to reduce carbon, realizing the devastation of carbon will get worse and worse for the next several decades. If I were a politician, I would really be worried, because that is a very unpleasant message. That is biting the bullet, and I think most politicians prefer to gum the marshmallow, which is not going to be possible.
Yeah, it doesn't get us there.
No, but I think people want to preserve plants, planting trees, species. Let's learn about things. I mean, I was very surprised to know that, I have hundreds of different native plants on these 2,500 acres. And I met a man who used to be the head of resource conservation in Colusa County, and he's walked over every part of this ranch and loves to come here, and he knows all the names of the plants. So he's my teacher here. And I find it actually, first of all, to learn the names and then to remember them and then be able to recognize them, that's a full-time job. And so I'm losing a little bit of my interest in who got what in what district. So those are interesting, and you got to work on it. But the basic stuff is very important too. And that's why I think you got to educate people. We got to get in the curriculum. I think the legislators ought to have some seminars in addition to going to Hawaii, which doesn't look so good. I'm sure it's a lot of fun, but maybe they could have the Nature Conservancy could have some gatherings more local right here and teach them about nature. That would be good. So I think we ought to think about that. Think of a Hawaii junket equivalent, but nature-based and oriented toward what they need to know if we're going to preserve the habitat and deal with the other threats to our existence.
Yeah, I think that's good counsel. We've got to make it more real for people, and probably beyond legislators too. But but appreciate that. I think, Governor, you've been very generous with your time this morning. It is always a pleasure. You've got lots of ideas for us. We would like to roll up our sleeves with you, I think, and show you some of our work and see what we can learn from each other in sustainable resource management and restoration. And thank you for your time. Our best to you and Ann and your family and your work. And we really do hope to make the most of this UC Berkeley, California, China climate venture with you.
It's a great forum to work, and I would look forward to working with you and all your people. I also want to thank you for working on some of our water projects. I know they're controversial, but with the coming changes in our hydrological cycle here, they can be very important. So I think the Conservancy has played a very positive role dealing with the problems as they are, and not just defaulting to easy advocacy that often doesn't get us where we need to go.
Thanks for that. There are some projects that we're doing with the rice industry in the Sac Valley, also looking at recharge potential and sustainable groundwater management up there that I think really kind of bring to life the work that we did with you and Nancy and your team on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in 2014. And so as soon as we can get outside a bit here, we'd like to to show you some of those projects in the Sacramento Valley.
Good. Well, and the voluntary agreements are still not signed. So remember, a couple of years ago, we were talking about this. It's still a problem.
Yeah, we got a ways to go there. I think maybe we can have you back early next year and talk about some of the challenges in balancing the state's water budget in a way that actually helps us protect biodiversity too.
Yep. Well, we're very aware of water. We got a little water yesterday, about 1/10 of an inch. And I see looks like we're having sunny weather for the next 10 days. So we may be headed for another drought. Hopefully we're not, but we got a lot of, nature is not going to let us relent here. We're going to have to step up our efforts, and so will you and all your members.
Great. Well, thank you again, Governor. You've given us a lot to think about, and I guess the big message is get beyond this election and get your work done.
Get your work done, and don't forget the soil on which you stand. So smell the flowers, see the birds, and check out the stars.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for that, Governor. You're
right.
an inspiration to us on many levels. So keep it going.
Okay. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. For our audience now, we're going to actually back up a little bit. We're going to slow down, and we're going to put some questions online on issues that the Nature Conservancy is working on. I think that fall consistent with the charter that Governor Brown has dispatched us on here. And we want to get your feedback on some of the big public policy issues that we're working on, again, headed toward 2021 and 2022 in California. The first one is, just fundamentally, is the state doing enough to lead the way in addressing climate change and protecting our natural environment? And the fun thing about this use of technology and Zoom here is we can actually share these results with you in real time. So let's give folks a few minutes, and after these questions, we're going to bring my colleague Mark Kramer in to talk a bit more about the federal election dynamics, what it means for conservation. But let's take a little intermission here, slow down a bit, and do these questions. Catherine, can you open that up to allow people to participate there? All right, let's see. So we've got, let's see, about 130 responses, and we've got a pretty good mandate here that 54% of you do not believe we're doing enough today to address climate change. Let's jump to our second question. So the second question is, given what you've heard, are you more optimistic or not that we can make real progress in 2021 toward advancing policy and funding solutions? And I'm going to restrict this maybe to California to address climate change and from the perspective of our state, and linking with what the Biden administration and the charter that Governor Brown talked about there is headed on. Are you more optimistic or less optimistic? Let's just test this. Well, that's good. So we're almost hitting a 2/3 margin of being more optimistic about getting around this corner. So I think that makes, and honestly, I think that we're certainly encouraged, I think, by some of the conversations that we're beginning to have with legislators and other policymakers as we think about some of the work that we're really driving on natural and working land strategies. Next question is, would you be in favor of a $10 billion climate resilience bond, an investment framework that would really help us address floods, fires, sea level rise, this would require a voter approval on the 2022 ballot. Is this something that you would support, or is it something that you would need more information on to support at this time? Is your read of the election that you would oppose new funding, or that you think the electorate is going to oppose new funding answers? And then, or are you just not sure? So let's test this one out too. Great. I'm super encouraged to see those numbers. So we're excited to figure out how we really continue to build a base of support for a climate bond. This is really one of our seminal priorities as we look toward 2021 and getting around the corner to really have resources to address climate change that, as Governor Brown noted, is already at our doorstep. Finally, would you support a plastics waste reduction requirement at the state level and a manufacturing fee that would also generate funds to mitigate the impacts of plastics on the environment? That, let's say it were a penny a package. So would you support a measure to address plastics waste reduction? Yeah, if you need more information, or is this something that you think is beyond an action that the state should be thinking about? Let's see where folks are on this. Great. Well, that's an overwhelming mandate. That's great. That's fun. And again, there's actually this measure qualified as an initiative, but due to circumstances around the shutdowns and the ability to, one, the economy, but two, just public health requirements that really prevented signature gathering operations. But the courts have actually ruled and qualified the measure now for the November 2022 ballot. So everyone will have a chance to actually vote on that measure. We'll be talking about it more in the months ahead, and super excited to see those numbers. So so we look forward to having a continuing dialogue with you on the plastics waste reduction and fees to address the overwhelming impacts that we're seeing on the environment from plastics. Super encouraging there. So now, if I might, I'm going to step back and go beyond California. I want to welcome my colleague, Mark Kramer, into the discussion. Mark is our lead federal policy director for the Nature Conservancy in Washington. Mark works closely with the other Conservancy chapters across the country and at our World Office headquarters in Washington. Mark, how are you feeling about things after the election?
Well, it's like the governor said, the country is pretty evenly divided. It's neither as conservative as some people would prefer, nor as progressive as others might prefer. And I would say, you know, we had a pretty decisive outcome at the presidential level, although it's not been entirely conceded that that's the case. We're proceeding with the assumption that we'll be dealing with a new administration. We're starting our outreach to the teams that are in place to take over the various departments come January 20th. The House is very evenly divided. The current majority will remain. Speaker Pelosi will remain Speaker, but she's going to have the narrowest margin in 18 years. Right now, there's 222 seats that have been called for Democrats. They've lost 7. There are 8 seats uncalled, all leaning Republican. 2 of those are in California. One of them's within 400 votes or so. The other is within 1,800 votes or so. Unclear when they'll be called, but sometime in the next week or so, probably. California allows absentee ballots to show up until the 20th of November. So nail biters, really closely divided. Our delegation will be mostly Democrat, as it was before in the House. We had 7 Republicans out of 53, so pretty overwhelmingly Democrat. Now we're going to have at least 9 and maybe 11. What that means is it's good to have our delegation mostly in the majority, because that means they have chairmanships and subcommittee, full committee chairmanships and subcommittee chairmanships. They have more influence. The Senate is undetermined yet because it depends on the outcome of the elections in Georgia. Likely those will remain with the Republicans, but perhaps not. So there'll be a lot of attention on Georgia for the next 2 months. Be a good time to own a TV station in Atlanta. But I will say this, that the Nature Conservancy, regardless of which party's in control, is well positioned to make progress on the issues we care about. Our 2 biggest successes at the federal level in the last few years have occurred with either Republican-controlled government or divided government. So the first big one to mention is in March of 2018, we finally got what we call the fire funding fix, which is where we pay for wildfire disasters in a more intelligent way so that we aren't holding up the projects that are meant to reduce the risk of fire in order to put out fires. So that was a huge outcome, where we actually treat wildfire disasters like we do, more or less like we do other disasters. And that was a big breakthrough. The Conservancy made it its #1 priority. It happened. Very bipartisan. And then more recently, this last summer, we got reliable funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund after years of working on that. And that again happened with Republican Senate. President Trump signed both of those bills into law. So I guess I would say we're going to, be positioned to make headway regardless of the outcome. Our top priorities for this next year are going to be focusing on an eventual stimulus bill that will need to happen to help the country recover from the pandemic-induced recession. And we're going to keep working on climate change. And by that, we mean carbon-free energy, renewable energy, adaptation, climate resilience, nature-based solutions, all things that have a lot of bipartisan support. So my take is, it's in some ways, at least at the congressional level, a status quo election. We will have change in the administration, but I think we're going to be positioned to continue to make progress regardless.
So what do you, I guess, a quick summary, and maybe I just heard this yesterday, which I thought was the best summary of the election, is this was a change election for Donald Trump, but across the country, little else. And but I think, Mark, can you talk a little bit more about what a stimulus package might mean for California? I mean, obviously, we've got to deal with the COVID crisis around us and the impacts of COVID directly, but what else could be in a stimulus for the environment that you've got on your agenda?
Well, stimulus bills generally pump more money into programs that already exist. And so for our work, there could be investment in water resource infrastructure, which could include nature-based solutions like floodplain restoration. We could also have a significant investment in forest restoration, so pump money into some of the key Forest Service accounts. Those would be the main things that jump to mind at the beginning. There could also be a significant investment in transportation infrastructure, but with some of the sideboards that we've been working on for years with respect to wildlife connectivity, and better culverts for fish passage and things like that. So, and then some direct just ecosystem restoration through the Department of Agriculture and others. Those programs we've shown definitely do create more jobs per dollar spent than most other options. So we're hoping to have all of that included and then make significant investments in ecosystem health here on the ground in California.
Yeah, it's well. So, what are you most optimistic about in 2021? I mean, what do you with the change in administrations at the federal level, what are you seeing emerge with a Biden administration in Washington?
Well, there's definitely going to be a very different emphasis with respect to climate change and also public land management. So we'll probably see reversal of a couple of the monument changes, mostly in Utah. We dodged most of the changes here in California, but there were a couple of proposals that have moved forward to significantly shrink the size of a couple of key monuments in Utah, including one in which the Nature Conservancy is the largest in holding. And so we would encourage that. So I expect, public land use changes. And then I also think the administration is going to do everything it can that is under the control of the executive branch to address climate change. So that will be a major priority. More emphasis on renewables, less on oil and gas. And there may be a number of reversals of decisions that have moved forward to the extent that they're under the control of the executive branch. There is one tool that would become an option if the Senate flips. That's called the Congressional Review Act. It's one that at the beginning of the Trump administration was used by Congress when it was entirely under Republican control to undo a number of Obama administration regulations. And at the moment, that wouldn't be an option. But if the Senate changes hands, then that will probably be something that will be pursued.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that
undo a rulemaking, you have to go through a whole new rulemaking, and that's a long involved process with a lot of documentation and public comment. But the Congressional Review Act allows a quick overturn as long as it's a recent rule in the last few months.
Right. That's a good point to raise there. I mean, so what you're pointing out, you could either do it in a wholesale way with Congress's approval, or it's going to be block by block, tackle by tackle, getting through, kind of rebuilding some of the environmental regulatory framework that was taken apart with the Congressional Review Act.
Yeah, anything that was done with an executive order can be undone with an executive order. So that's fairly quick. Anything that went through the formal rulemaking process with notice and comment, that requires that same process to undo it or to change it, unless Congress acts.
Yeah.
A lot can be done by the executive branch too through their acquisition priorities, the way they spend money to buy equipment and material for government projects. So we may see some changes in that regard.
Say, we don't have a long history with Kamala Harris on these issues, but can you talk a little bit about some of the issues that we've been working on with Senator Harris, now Vice President-elect Harris's office, and what you think may particularly connect on the environmental agenda with Vice President Harris based on that experience?
Well, the staff we've worked with, she's definitely interested in environmental justice issues, including access to drinking water. That's been a priority. Clean water in the environment, that's also a priority, as is climate change. So we've had all those conversations. I expect that'll continue to be a priority for her in the administration. And that's another point to raise, is that we will have a new senator once she becomes vice president, and that will be a person appointed by Governor Newsom. And they'll serve for 2 years until the next election cycle, and then they'll have to stand for election. There's various names been put forward, but remains to be seen. It'll be entirely the governor's decision.
Right. You want to talk about some of those names? I mean, we hear Representative Karen Bass's name. We hear Secretary of State Padilla's name in the mix. There are probably others out there. Do you want to talk a little about
those two names? And then Attorney General Becerra is also in the mix. You would know as well as I, but the word is the governor will want to do something that makes history. So yes, it will be probably one of those three or somebody similar.
Right. Well, what are you most optimistic about looking to 2021?
We'll get some kind of stimulus bill, and I think there'll be an opportunity to get a lot of good work done. So that's what I'm most optimistic about. And the pandemic is going to end, and we're going to get back to work. The economy will get going, and that'll create opportunity to get back to our work as well. So 2021 will have to be better than 2020.
Those are good words to end on. That's a positive charter for sure. So hopefully a vaccine is on its way and gets us around the corner. So anyway, Mark, I thank you for all you do for the Nature Conservancy in California, in Washington, D.C. We really appreciate your incredible source of wisdom and stick-to-itiveness and getting these things done. So appreciate all you're doing there. And I just also want to thank our audience, our board, our staff, our donors, our members around the state for supporting our work here. Obviously, as Governor Brown notes, we have a big charter ahead of us. We've really got we do have little time to reverse the trajectory of climate change. Natural and working lands has to play a big part of that. As the governor notes, it's really got it is the direct nexus to protecting biodiversity, both in California and globally. And we just greatly appreciate your support for the work we do. We look forward to rolling up our sleeves with all of you, hopefully getting out on the ground, enjoying nature. I think one of the most encouraging things I've heard in these COVID times is that you're 20 times more likely to get the coronavirus inside rather than outside. So that's certainly a clarion call for all of us to be spending more time outside. But I want to thank all of you for what you do for the Nature Conservancy, and stay healthy out there. And thank you for spending some time with us today. So take care out there, and Godspeed to all of you. Wish you all the best as we head into Thanksgiving and the holidays. Thank you.